As the coronavirus envelops our businesses and private lives, we begin to experience huge cultural and social shifts. It includes social distancing, smaller gatherings, continuous washing of hands, wiping down surfaces. You might even find yourself raging against people who cough or sneeze in public. But rest assured, you are not alone. With us now from Skype, on Skype from Los Angeles, Dr. Bethany Marshall, PhD and certified psychoanalyst. Doctor, you say that in your practice you've observed patients go through certain stages in responding to the crisis. Talk about that a bit, if you would.
Yes, Trace, it's a little like the 5 stages of grief that we all know about, but this is the 4 stages of responding to a pandemic. The first stage is denial. This isn't happening to me. This is the Democrats trying to take down Trump. This is China trying to sink our economy. All these crazy ideas that nothing bad could happen to us. The second is going from denial to panic. The panic comes from the amygdala, the primitive part of the brain that warned us of danger in our evolutionary biological heritage, warned us of danger by predators or volcanoes. That part of the brain gets so activated that there's a social contagion where people start glaring at people who sneeze. They tear toilet paper, off the shelves. They start hoarding. They begin to distance themselves from their neighbors out of paranoia. The third stage is that the pandemic begins to tap into people's trauma. I have a patient in Beverly Hills who's wealthy, rich, beautiful, but she grew up in a deprived household, so she cannot get enough food and groceries into her house. She keeps hoarding because it taps into that old trauma of not having enough. The final stage is prudence. Going from paranoia to prudence, or from the amygdala, the fearful part of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex, the part of us that can think and reason. And when we go into that stage, we start to think calmly, reasonably, and we start to assess the news in a realistic way and look for reliable sources of information.
Yeah, Doctor, I want to play you this soundbite. We just talked about this. Eric Garcetti, the mayor in Los Angeles, he said this about grocery stores, etc. Watch.
Let me be clear. Supply chains are completely uninterrupted, and there's no shortage of food. So I'm imploring Angelenos not to overbuy, not to panic buy.
Listen, with all due respect to the mayor, I was in a couple of stores today and they're picked out. I mean, some stores have very little left on the shelves. He says the supply chain is intact, but you walk into a store and it doesn't look like it. And it creates some panic among the people who are looking for the things they need to feed their family. And sometimes you gotta say, I get it.
That's right. Trace, I think it's 2 things. One is social contagion. A part of our survival as a species was to take our physical and psychological cues from those around us. So Mayor Garcetti can say whatever he wants, but when frightened people walk into a grocery store and there are bare aisles and there's no produce, they start mimicking their neighbors. The other thing is, after 9/11, there was this huge spike in warmth and well-being and neighbors helping neighbors, because the bad thing had already happened. It was a known quantity. This is unknown, which increases our risk assessment. When we don't know what's happening, we read into it our worst possible fears and fantasies. So this is invisible. We don't know if it's in our neighbor, if it's in ourselves. We're inundated with horrible images and information. We have no control. So whereas 9/11 produced goodwill, a spike of goodwill in the aftermath, this is producing a dearth of goodwill. This is producing paranoia towards each other, suspicion, anxiety, because it's unknown and the panic is seeming to grow.
Is it also producing selfishness, each person for themselves?
Yes. I've seen in a small portion of the population extreme selfishness. One patient gloated to me today that she felt she was special, and unlike the neighbor she didn't like, she wasn't going to get it. People are going to start hoarding medical supplies for themselves, even though they know other people need it, grabbing things off of grocery store shelves, even though there are maybe elderly people or vulnerable people who need those goods. They might even go into public and spread the coronavirus knowing that they're sick because they're prioritizing their needs over the needs of others. It's as if this self-centered, panicky survival instinct is setting in.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about shifts in behavior, I know you talked about 9/11 and people were very, I mean, it was amazing because I was in New York after 9/11 and there weren't even cabs honking horns. Everybody had just this respect for everybody else. And I don't really see that here. You know, it's one of those things where I'm not saying people are being evil or bad, but what kind of behavioral moves do you think we'll see or changes after this pandemic goes away?
Well, right now we're seeing racial profiling. Someone sneezes and other people run away. Someone's wearing a mask and other people glare at them. People feel stigmatized if they are sick. What's going to happen is that the people who behaved well during this crisis are good people and are going to continue to behave well. Those who behaved poorly will continue to behave poorly. When there was a huge spike in one direction or the other, you know, a fluctuation will go back towards the middle. What I really hope happens as a society is that whatever lessons we've learned, whatever ways we've learned to behave in better ways, that these are underscored in our education, our public forums, and in our entertainment, so we learn the lessons.
Yeah, and lastly, I guess the question is, what's your advice to people when you're saying, look, we need to be rational, we need to be reasonable human beings? What are you telling them to kind of convey that message?
I'm saying to them, only go to reliable sources of information like the CDC, your doctor's office, and base your fears on facts rather than your own fearful fantasies.
It's all good advice, Dr. Bethany Marshall. It's so good of you to join us very late at night, even here in Los Angeles. Thank you so much.